Okay, so let's launch into this. Maximum impact. So this term force multiplier, for those of you who might not have heard it, it's a very common one used in military environments. And of course, the notion is if you have just a limited force, how might you project your limited force in a way that makes it seem as if you have a much larger force? So obviously, back in the early days of World War I, when they first had aircraft covering the battlefield and surveying the battlefield, that ended up being a force multiplier for the ground troops, just to give you a sense there. So I contend that there are similar force multipliers for project portfolios, and that's going to be the focus of today's webinar. Cool. So I want to make a promise to everyone, and that is to inspire and excite you on this topic. You know, think of the terms like project management. It doesn't always come across as a terribly inspirational or exciting topic at first blush. Of course, for people like me, it's extraordinarily inspirational and exciting to impart upon the audience today. Said that, if you're already come inspired and excited, I figured I'd offer you something beyond this, since I will have already met that promise, right? And that is to wild-eyed stretch goal. So my wild-eyed stretch goal for this session is actually to help you feel like you can improve humankind. You can advance humankind by improving project portfolio performance, which is really, in my mind, the same thing as organizational performance. Again, and to do so dramatically. You know, we're not talking 10%, 20%. We're talking double, triple, and beyond. Okay, so in fact, for those of you who offer feedback to this session, I'd actually be curious to hear from you if I met the promise and the wild-eyed stretch goal. And please don't be extra kind or charitable. Offer the right level of scrutiny to see whether I genuinely reached this goal, this promise and the stretch goal. Okay, if I'm going to help you be really high-impact leaders to the point where you can advance humankind, I thought it would be only fair to start out with explaining what I mean, because this term high impact is thrown around a lot. And the more it's thrown around, it tends to lose, it tends to have some of its meaning diluted. There was another term that was not yet diluted, so I figured let's just make clear what I mean when I say high impact. For examples, this first one, the major events of September 11th, but very few of us are actually familiar in a very important piece of what happened that day, which is that it was the largest sea lift rescue carried out in human history. For three buffs, you might know about the 1940 evacuation of Dunkirk, successfully ferried 339,000 British and French soldiers across the English Channel to safety right before Hitler was able to basically land what would have been the final crushing blow of the war. Somewhat astonishingly, to those of us who might not have heard, there were more people trapped in lower Manhattan on 9/11 with no way to get off the island except when they did open the bridges, and many of us saw the images on TV of folks walking across the Brooklyn Bridge, for example, between 9 in the morning, or shortly before 9 when the attack started, and I guess around 2 to 2:30 in the afternoon. There was no way on or off the island except by boat. Note, I said rescued 35 times more people per hour. So not only was it the largest, but it was also the highest throughput. It's pretty amazing, right? Because we always think the larger you are, the slower you must be, right? And the harder it is to move quickly. If you look at the rescue throughput, right, the number of people rescued per hour, 1,500 people at Dunkirk, pretty impressive. 9/11 was more than that, pretty incredible, almost 55,000 people per hour. So that's one example. Oh, by the way, if you're curious to learn more about this story, there is a great YouTube video that came out for the 10th anniversary of 9/11, so it's already about 5.5 years old. That gentleman there, Captain Michael Day of the Coast Guard, I had the distinct pleasure of interviewing him and learning more about how he pulled all this off. You can see the fine print there. There's even a keynote presentation I gave about a year ago that was video recorded, and you can check out details there. That's the first example. Second one, Blush seem a bit more mundane, right? This is just a pharmaceutical company talking about the life-saving drugs that it brought to market. And over the span of a few years, they managed to double that number without actually spending any more money. Over time, that could actually have a much bigger life-saving impact than the 9/11 sea lift rescue, even if it doesn't at first blush seem quite as dramatic. That's two. Number three, us who are closer to the IT and software worlds, right? Like most of us on this webinar, have heard of this story, right? Amazon software not quite 10 times a day, which for most of us would seem pretty incredible already. I know organizations that don't deploy new software more than like once a week. Large organizations with massive software footprints are still very hesitant to make changes, right? And so if you look at the little Amazon logo and imagine that that's 10 times a day deploying new software, visual to compare to what 7,000 times a day would look like. And then the last example I want to share with you, and I say high impact, is SpaceX. My career in the space industry, worked for NASA for quite a few years, cut my teeth in program and project management there. Even though that was now, the promise that we had with the space shuttle program going back to the 70s when it was designed was that we would lower the cost to low Earth orbit. And that if we could lower the cost dramatically, we could do a whole lot more in space and potentially even make space something that tourists could go to. In search of knowledge of the universe and scientific discoveries and things, which is the primary purpose. Well, SpaceX, a commercial company, showed up years, decades after NASA and other space agencies around the world have been trying to get this cost down for years and years, and actually not only succeeded, but succeeded wildly and made a profit in the process. So if you look at the history, these, I'll admit, are estimates since some of the cost figures are proprietary, owned by companies like Lockheed and Boeing. In general, a lot of the research backs up these estimates that, yeah, you know, since 1960, about every 10 years, we would knock cost off of things. But then, bam, all of a sudden, SpaceX started in 2002, and by 2010, they had reduced the cost by 5 times. And they actually think in the next 8 years, so by 2025, they can get it down to $100 per pound. And they've actually already booked a couple super secret celebrities have booked their flights as the first commercial space tourists that SpaceX will have. They expect to go into space sometime between now and 2020. Kind of neat. Okay, give you a taste of what I'm talking about. I think, again, some of these examples might be very unique, like this 9/11 sea lift rescue. We hope it's unique. We hope it doesn't happen often. But others are day-to-day office environments, right? Commercial firms, nations with a lot of human beings just like you and me actually figuring out a way to make incredible things happen. The question is, of course, how do they do it? Some exposure to each of these 4 examples. I've had the pleasure of interviewing key people in all 4 organizations to get to the bottom of how they did it. Certainly, inspirational leadership was a big part of it. A pleasure of working for inspirational leaders that attain these levels of performance.